Hi everyone, welcome back. I hope you had a wonderful holiday with your families, we're back to school and we're going to jump right back into the cardiovascular system. So the cardiovascular system is a very important system to know and to understand. Why? Because in America, 610,000 people every year die of cardiovascular disease. Out of every 4 deaths, one of those deaths, so 1 in every 4 deaths, is from cardiovascular disease. It's an issue in America that needs to be addressed. And if you are going into medicine, a lot of your patients are going to be dealing with cardiovascular disease. So it's a very important unit. This standard and what we're talking about right now is just the anatomy. What is everything? Physiology, how does it function together? But we'll move on definitely to factors. How does your external factors, your diet, your exercising, pollution, GMOs, how do all those things affect your cardiovascular system? We'll move on to that next. But first, we got to start off with what's the anatomy and what's our physiology of the heart. So anytime you see a system, so what this is this is your heart. Your heart is, as you guys know, is a cardiac muscle, and its job is to take blood and pump it to the lungs and pump it to all of your systems, all your organ systems. When you look at the circulations, you're going to see 3 colors, mostly 2, but sometimes 3. You're going to see red, blue, and purple. When you see red, that's indicating oxygenated blood. When we say oxygenated blood, that means percentage-wise you have more oxygen versus carbon dioxide. When you breathe in, you're breathing in oxygen and breathing out CO2 because of cellular respiration. So this blood has a higher percent of oxygen than carbon dioxide. So this would be blood that just came from your lungs. Blue indicates deoxygenated blood, meaning that you have a higher percentage of carbon dioxide than oxygen, meaning that the organs have just drained the oxygen from the blood and have released, due to cellular respiration, CO2 back into the blood system, right? And then it's going to go to your heart. It's going to pump it back to your lungs to be oxygenated again. So those are those 2 colors. So you have red, oxygenated, blue, deoxygenated. The lungs, or anywhere there's a capillary, so the here, 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 and here, means that you're having an exchange of gas. That means either oxygen's being depleted and turning into deoxygenated blood, or in the lungs, your deoxygenated blood is being oxygenated to become, like I said, oxygenated here. Okay, so those are your colors. So oxygenated, deoxygenated, and an exchange, depending on where it is. If it's a systemic circulation, that means the blood is being delivered to your body. So oxygenated blood is being delivered to your brain or upper organ systems, to your lower organ systems, and it's being drained of oxygen, and the deoxygenated blood is going back to the heart. So that's systemic. It's going to your organ systems, systemic. The pulmonary means lungs, is the deoxygenated blood going to the lungs and oxygenated being pumped back, being placed back into the heart. Okay, so you have these two circulations are working together in order to make sure that all of your systems are oxygenated and working correctly. So talking a little bit about the structure of the heart. It's the size, it's like 14 centimeters times 9 centimeters. That can be a little weird to understand. Like, what does that look like? About the size of your fist. So that means like a smaller person with a smaller structure may have smaller heart compared to someone that's larger with a larger structure, because they need to pump that blood, that oxygenated blood, to like a further distance. Sternum, in between your 2nd and 5th rib, there's an area called the mediastinum. That's your space in which you would find your heart. And when we say the Pledge of Allegiance, that's where we're supposed to place our hands, so right behind your sternum. If you take a look at the very tip of the heart, you'll see that it's sort of pointed towards the left. That is called the apex of the heart. The heart isn't just by itself. It's inside of, enclosed in some connective tissue in a bag called the pericardium. Inside there's fluid, which is for friction because your heart is pumping and is moving, and that fluid makes sure that it's not tearing the heart because your lungs are right here. So without the bag and without the fluid, your heart could get damaged due to friction. So your heart is made up of 3 layers. You have the outermost layer, which is called the epicardium. Epi means outer or around. But then one of the most important layers would probably be your myocardium. Myo means muscle. This is the layer that we kind of learned about when we were talking about the type of muscles. So your cardiac muscle, if you remember, and you can kind of really see in this picture, is cylindrical, striated, branched, and has intercalated discs. So that structure is where you'd find, that's what we're talking about here, okay? Then you have your endocardium, and that's what actually touches the chambers inside your heart. So this would be your atrium or ventricle. So epicardium, outermost. Myocardium is where you're going to find that muscle that's going to be pumping and forcing that blood to the next structure. And the endocardium, which is actually touching the blood inside of the heart. So atrium and ventricle structures. So this is a repeat, but just as a reminder that your heart is a double pump and has 2 circulations. You have the pulmonary circuit. Always remember, if you remember pulmonary and lungs together, you'll be golden from here on out because you hear that a lot. So pulmonary circuit is what's going to and from the lungs. Another thing to remember is that your lungs are oxygenating your blood. So if it's going towards the lungs, that means its job and the whole reasoning behind it is to get oxygenated. The systemic circuit is going towards your organ systems. So that's going towards your digestive system, your urinary system, reproductive system, your brain, in order to give it oxygen and bring back that CO2, that deoxygenated blood, to reoxygenate it again. So this is a heart. The heart has 4 chambers. We're going to start with the chambers first, but you have 4 chambers. Remember, it's always your patient's right. So when we're talking about this would be the right side, okay, the right side, and this would be the left side of the heart. So right atrium, so you have atrium, which is on top, so you have the right atrium and the left atrium. I kind of remember that A is the beginning of the alphabet, A is on top. Your ventricles, which are the major muscles, you're going to find that the chamber is not as big as you would think, but it's a lot of muscle around it because these are actually this structure. So the atrium, the blood doesn't have far to go. It's just going from here to here, right, into the ventricle. But the ventricles have a lot of work to do because it actually has to take the blood and pump it out of the heart, either into the lungs or into the systems, depending on the side of the heart, which I'll get to in a minute. You have these arteries and veins. Artery, away. So arteries are always pumping the blood away. Some students, you tried to memorize like deoxygenated versus oxygenated. Don't do that because that does not have a pattern. But a way to memorize is artery away. An artery is always pumping the blood or taking the blood away from the heart. Veins are always bringing the blood towards the heart. Okay, so arteries away, veins towards. Okay, so the heart has 4 chambers. So we took the heart and we cut it coronal or frontal. So we're taking the front off of the heart and we're looking inside. You have 2 atrium, the right and the left. So right atrium and left atrium. These are receiving blood from veins, right? Because the veins just brought it towards the heart. So depending on which one it is, one will be oxygenated and one will be deoxygenated, but we'll learn that later. Just know that these are your atrium. Then you also have 2 ventricles. You have your right ventricle and your left ventricle. Your left ventricle, as you see, has a little bit thicker muscle, so it has a thicker myocardium, because this chamber is actually going to be pumping the blood out of the heart into the body. So that's why it's so thick. They will lead to arteries away, right? The ventricles are pumping it away. The septum is this space in between the ventricles. It's made up of muscle. And apex is the tip of the heart. You can always use the tip of the heart to identify where the left side of the heart versus the right. Your apex points towards the left. So that will help you identify. So another picture to see: the right atrium, right ventricle, left ventricle. The atriums receive blood, ventricles are pumping the blood away. So now we're going to get to vessels, veins, and arteries. So remember, guys, arteries away, veins towards. So the vena cavas are veins. So that means if it's a vein, that means it's pumping it to the heart or towards the heart. So the superior, inferior, superior means above, inferior means below. So the superior vena cava, it's blue, is pumping deoxygenated blood, or not pumping, it's bringing back deoxygenated blood to the heart from the upper body. The inferior vena cava is bringing back deoxygenated blood to the heart from the lower body. The reason why it's deoxygenated is because it's just coming from your organ system cells, which means it's just gone through cellular respiration. Therefore, it has a higher concentration of CO2 versus oxygen. Pulmonary. So if I told you earlier, if you remember the term pulmonary and that it means lungs, it'll be a lot easier. So you have pulmonary artery. Remember, artery means away. So your pulmonary artery comes from the right ventricle, and it's being pumped from here through the pulmonary arteries towards the lungs, but it's going away from the heart to the lungs. So that's your pulmonary artery. Remember, you have two because you have a left and a right lung. So again, the pulmonary artery is coming from the heart to the lungs. The pulmonary veins, remember, vein means going toward the heart, is coming back, so now it's oxygenated because it went to the lungs. So your pulmonary veins are going from your lungs to the heart to be pumped, right? So it's going to actually come in here, right? So it's oxygenated and going to the heart. The last one we'll go over is the aorta, a large vessel that delivers oxygenated blood from the heart to the rest of your body, right? Aorta is an artery, therefore it's being pumped away. So you have ascending, which means it's going upwards, and descending is the one that's going downwards. So your ascending portion of the aorta has three main branches. You have the brachiocephalic, which will actually branch off into the right subclavian. So this is your brachiocephalic, and then that will branch off to your to your right subclavian and the right common carotid. So right here. So this brachiocephalic, right subclavian, that would go to your arm, and the carotid, which would go up to you technically have two that go towards the head. The left common carotid artery, that's one that's centered, and the left subclavian, that goes to your left arm, or all the left extremities. Your descending aorta is very large because it's supplying oxygenated blood to all the lower organ systems. When you look at the organ specifically, you're going to see that your artery does not actually connect directly. You have a branch, so the artery that's bringing oxygenated blood comes in. Your arteriole, which is a small branch from the arteriole, will go to the capillary to be drained of its oxygen. A venule will come in and attach to the vein, and it will go back towards the heart to be pumped to the lungs to get oxygenated again, and then it'll come back. So they kind of sound the same: artery, arteriole, venule, vein. So you also have some valves. So separating your atrium and ventricles, you have valves. Okay, so what their job is to make sure that the blood is not being pumped in the opposite direction. You always want the blood to be going in the correct direction. So you have atrioventricular valves. Your atrioventricular valves are the valves in between your atrium and ventricle. Your left atrioventricular valve is called the bicuspid, or also called the mitral, mitral valve. It's right here. Okay, you can see either term, bicuspid or mitral. The right atrioventricular valve is called the tricuspid valve. Bicuspid, two flaps, tricuspid valve, 3 flaps. So you also have 2 semilunar valves. Your semilunar valves, you have an aortic valve and a pulmonary valve. A trick to remember where these valves are located is to think where they're going. So your aortic valve is going to the aorta. Your pulmonary valve is in between, is going towards, it's the valve that's going towards or in between the pulmonary arteries. Okay, so your aortic valve is in between your left ventricle and the aorta. Okay, your pulmonary valve is in between the right ventricle and the pulmonary arteries. Again, you can remember it, aortic valve, aorta, pulmonary valves, pulmonary. So that's at least one of the structures is down. So just kind of seeing it in perspective, on the right side, you have the tricuspid valve. Okay, so that's the right part of the heart, separating your right atrium and the right ventricle. On the left side of the heart, you have the vitral or the bicuspid valve, which is separating the left atrium and the left ventricle. Then in between your left ventricle and your aorta, you have the aortic valve. And in between your right ventricle and your pulmonary arteries, you have the pulmonary valve. And again, the function of these is to make sure that the blood is always pumping in the right direction. So the blood will start to fill in the ventricle, and this will be shut. And then once it's ready to pump, it'll pump through and then shut behind it, just so that the pulmonary blood that's here doesn't go in the wrong direction. So this is just like a little valve to stop the blood from going. You want always going towards the right way. So you have the 4 valves here. You're going to name those now. So 1 was your pulmonary valve, because, right, your pulmonary valve. It's going towards the pulmonary artery. 2 was the tricuspid valve in between the right atrium and the right ventricle. 3 is the mitral or bicuspid valve in between the left atrium and left ventricle. Aortic valve is between the left ventricle, so it's number 4, and the heart apex was 5. At the very bottom of your diagram, I do have this here. We will go over that tomorrow. Okay, so now we're going to go over the path of blood flow. I will review this part of, I'm just going to go ahead and have you guys put the notes in, but we will review this on Friday. So red blood cells journey. I call it this because you got to think, pretend like you're like a little cell and you're traveling through the body, and like once you get to the heart, where are you coming in? So oxygenated blood is produced by the lungs. So we're going to start in the lungs. So just imagine you're just a little red blood cell, you're in the lungs. Because you came from the lungs, you're oxygenated. The oxygenated blood enters the heart through the pulmonary veins, left and right. So imagine both lungs coming in towards the heart. The blood will then travel to the left atrium, then the left ventricle. So from the lungs, you'll go through the pulmonary veins, the left atrium to the left ventricle. Left ventricle is the most powerful of the chambers because it's going to be pumping out of the body into all of your organs. The oxygenated blood is then pumped out of the heart through the aorta. The oxygenated blood will travel to different organs. And just remember, your aorta is an artery, so then you still have the arterioles, the artery of the aorta, whatever artery it is, there's many different arteries, to the arterial, to the capillary, and now it's been drained. So transport blood from the arteries to the arterial of the organ. The blood will enter the blood capillaries of the organ. Now the oxygen has been depleted. It is now deoxygenated, which means it has a higher concentration of CO2 due to cellular respiration. So every cell, so let's imagine it's, let's say it's the cells inside of your stomach. It needs oxygen and goes through cellular respiration, gives off CO2. Now that red is blue. And I don't know if I said this before, but that's a myth. It really doesn't look blue. It's just a way to identify in a structure. Okay, and the journey continues. So now you are a deoxygenated blood cell, which means that you have more CO2 than oxygen. So now that you're from the capillaries, you're going to go to the venules and transport deoxygenated blood from the capillary of the organ to the vein. The deoxygenated blood will travel back to the heart via the vena cava, inferior or superior. If it came from the brain, it'd be superior. If it came from any of the organ systems that are below that, like digestive or urinary or reproductive, or any of the muscles below that, it would go to the inferior. The deoxygenated blood will enter the right atrium and travel to the right ventricle. So the right side of the heart is blue, right, when you're thinking about the colors. The deoxygenated blood will pump out of the heart and travel back to the lungs via pulmonary arteries. So from the right ventricle will contract, pushing it out the pulmonary arteries back to the lungs. Will return the blood to its oxygenated state, right? Breathe in, you're oxygenating it, and the blood will pump again to the organs by the heart. So if you kind of remember, right, that your right side of the heart is blue, right, because it's deoxygenated. Remember, that's what's coming from your organ system. And the left side of your heart is red because it's oxygenated, because it's just received the oxygenated blood from your lungs, right? And it's pumping it to your organ systems. All right, very good. This concludes the cardiovascular system. Please take the quiz at the end, and you also want to take your quizzes to see how you are doing. And we will review the structure tomorrow. And we will do the functions on Friday.